So today we're going to talk a little bit more about cholesterol. If you've ever gone on a low-carb, ketogenic, or carnivore-style diet, if you exercise or do any intermittent fasting, it's actually quite common that your LDL cholesterol increases, which causes your medical doctor to freak out. And so in today's session, what we're going to do is I'm going to share with you some science, some facts about the physiology, and additional biomarkers that you can request your doctor order so that they don't freak out, so that they're not like constantly bugging you to get on a statin or a cholesterol lowering medication. Now, if that's the right thing for you, I'm not trying to play doctor here. However, there's additional biomarkers in testing that's really affordable and accessible. And I want to share with you the physiology so that you can have better conversations with your healthcare provider. We're going to talk in today's session about ApoB, ApoB to the ApoA-1 ratio, what that is, what that means, and how to look at that from a more nuanced perspective. We're going to talk about looking at advanced cardiovascular risk assessment using lipoprotein particle assessing. So we're going to look at a case study here on an individual, and this was from scientists at Harvard that actually followed an individual who basically cured his IBS on a ketogenic diet, but looking at his lipid levels, most doctors would have advised him to go back on the diet that was worsening his IBS because his lipids increased. But upon looking at pre and post lipoprotein particle analysis, what's called subtractionation, there wasn't a really strong clinical indication to cause this individual to come off the diet, because if you look at the particles, there wasn't a demonstrable increase in the so-called atherogenic phenotype. And I'm going to define all these things. I'm just giving you the big picture. Then we're going to talk about lipoprotein little a, LP little a. This is very important with everything that's going on in the world because this is involved in LDL oxidation and could potentially increase blood clotting. So this is a biomarker that you should be aware of and know about. So let's dive into it. I'm super excited to share this with you, especially during the winter months, because a lot of people don't know there's a time for everything. There's a season for everything. And it turns out that December, January, February, the cold, dark winter months, for those of us that are in the northern part of the world, the prevalence and the increased propensity for individuals to suffer from a fatal heart attack is actually about 35% higher. And this is usually why during the winter months, the hospitals are generally overrun or running near capacity, because heart disease and strokes, the incidence and the prevalence is much higher. So this is probably top of mind. And I always remind my clients, December, January is a great time to do your blood work, to do your labs. Just a gentle reminder, we have our blood work cheat sheet. I will link it below. Everything that we talk about today is on page 1. It's free. Check it out. Okay. Now let's just start out with an N of 1 example of my wife. She's 46. She's physically fit. She's been intermittent fasting, following, I would say, a carb cycling diet since 2013. Now here is her LDL cholesterol. It jumped up. This is after exercise, I should add, okay? She did a fasted cardio session. She did some HIIT workout. It was some sprinting by Cynthia Monteleone, Fast Over 40. She's got a great book about sprinting, especially for women. Phenomenal book. So she did one of Cynthia's workouts. Check out her total cholesterol, 574 milligrams per DL, okay? Most doctors would literally crap their pants as you're sitting there showing this to them. They'd be like, oh my gosh, we're going to put a statin IV in you ASAP. Her LDL cholesterol, 468. Now we need to consider the context. Remember, friends, she did a fasted exercise session. She is very lean, very physically fit, walks, exercises. She's been living a metabolically healthy life for a number of years. So therefore, when she exercises, and potentially when you exercise and you start to become more metabolically healthy, you are preferentially oxidizing and utilizing fats for fuel during that session. So it's natural, because LDL cholesterol is a bus. It's a delivery system. It's a transport for triglycerides to mobilize energy systems throughout the body. So in a fasted exercise state, we would naturally see that to be increased. Now, no doctor worth their salt would look at exercise and say, exercise worsens heart disease because it raises LDL. They wouldn't say that. So why should we constantly view LDL as this problem child, this always damaging? I mean, this is made by your own body. Do you think your body wants to make something that would, look, I know cytokines don't fit that loose analogy, but why would your liver make something that just would go and damage the arteries that feed the liver? Like, it doesn't make a lot of teleologic sense. So we need to take a step back. And in today's video, we're going to talk more about oxidized LDL, why oxidized LDL is a problem, and how to potentially look at that, the level of oxidized LDL directly or indirectly through LP(a), and talk about the ratio of ApoB, which I'll define right now. Apolipoprotein B is found on all of the atherogenic LDL, VLDL, and remnant lipoproteins. So any of the potentially atherogenic particles that could, get inside your arterial system and have this so-called macrophage infiltration and foam cell creation that leads to the narrowing or the stenosis in the diameter of the lumen of your vessels, that can be from oxidized LDL, oxidized remnants, oxidized VLDL, okay? So every single one of those atherogenic particles have one apolipoprotein B, or also known as ApoB, on them. In contrast, your HDL cholesterol, which, let me just quickly go back, part of the future and the job of the remnants of the VLDL and the LDL is to take lipids, triglycerides, and cholesterol from your liver and deliver it to the rest of the body. The job of HDL is the reverse. It's involved in reverse cholesterol transport. Okay, so meaning taking lipids from the brain, from the periphery to mobilize to the liver, to the gut. It's involved in the reverse. So having the ratio of ApoB to A1 is helpful because ApoA-1 is sort of the antithesis of ApoB. It's found on your HDL particles. So HDL considered protective. We're going to talk more about the antioxidant properties, the functions that HDL cholesterol offers when it comes to prevent or improving the health of the endothelial tissue, which is the functional unit of your entire cardiovascular system. Remember, endothelial dysfunction is the same ED as erectile dysfunction. They're the same disease, okay? Hypertension, high blood pressure equals ED, erectile dysfunction, and endothelial dysfunction. So HDL cholesterol is so important. I'll just say this now in case I forget to say this later. If you're going on a low carb diet and you're not exercising, I really think that's a problem. I think all of us should encompass the healthy living concept, including exercise and cutting out unnecessary carbohydrates that are incoherent with the amount of exercise that you're doing. They should be commensurate, right? You should balance the amount of carbs that you have with the amount of physical activity that you do, okay? So just understand that. So HDL cholesterol is increased through exercise. Now, this is important because we're going to get into the ketogenic diet and the low carb diet and how when you embark on these, what I consider to be more healthy eating plans, your LDL cholesterol does increase, and therefore it is more prone to be oxidized. So you should remove or omit omega-6 oils from your diet, the safflower or canola, the sunflower, the soy, the cottonseed, all of those oils, corn oil from your diet, because they are highly oxidizable. And so if your LDL is already elevated by virtue of becoming more fat adapted, it's more prone to oxidation. So we're going to get some benefit from HDL's ability to neutralize pro-oxidants in the body, okay? So I know we're kind of talking about a lot of things here, but let's get in specifically and talk about the ApoB to A1 ratio and how this is a more sensitive and specific predictor than just LDL cholesterol when it comes to assessing your potential cardiovascular disease risk. So I want to share with you a paper, but before I do, friends, I just want to welcome you back. It's Mike Munsell. As always, thank you for being here. Hopefully you're finding this video and the images that you're seeing helpful. If you are, you can do just a few things. This actually really helps our channel and helps people like you who are trying to become healthier, especially in this crazy environment. You can hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, actually 3 things, and leave a comment. Okay, if you do all those 3 things, you are really helping yourself and other people who are interested in becoming a healthier version of themselves, okay? Also, friends, we want to inspire other people to make the same nutrition and lifestyle changes that you are doing. So we've rolled out a series of t-shirts to do just that, to have better conversations about eating real food, balancing your sleep, exercising more. So we have a suite of t-shirts that I know you're going to enjoy wearing around to inspire other people to not have soda pop and not have French fries and not hit up Chick-fil-A for lunch, okay? So the links will be below. It's at our sister company, myoscience.com. That's MYOXCIENCE.com. Use the coupon code podcast to save on some inspiring t-shirts at Myoscience. Okay, so this paper, again, if your doctor is freaked out about your LDL cholesterol, you got to print out this paper. It's free. It's on the internet. Bring it to them and ask and request for your ApoB to A1 ratio test. My friends, I've worked with probably close to 1,000 clients since 2006. Virtually none of them have come to me with an ApoB to A1 ratio. It's a $9 test. It's $9. It's way more sensitive, way more specific than your LDL cholesterol, which, by the way, I used to sell this technology. Your LDL cholesterol that you get from your standard lab is an estimate. A lot of people don't know that. It's a mathematical estimate, right? It's called the Friedewald equation. You can Google it. You can look it up. I'm not making this stuff up. So when you base clinical decisions, whether or not your mom or your dad or you should be on a statin based upon a mathematical estimate, That's garbage. We want to look directly at this. So the title of the paper here is the ApoB to A1 ratio is an effective predictor of coronary heart disease risk in overweight and obesity. Here's what's unique about this paper. This was conducted by scientists in China. They had two different groups, a sort of normal population that would represent the average individual who hasn't had a stroke or a heart attack or has no confirmed diagnosis of congestive heart failure or coronary artery disease. And then they had 400 individuals in the other subgroup who had a previous diagnosis of some sort of cardiovascular disease based upon a stress test or a cardioangiogram, EKG, different things like that, that the lumen of some of the coronary arteries were more than 50%. The diameter was narrowed. It was occluded. There was stenosis, right? There was a greater than 50% reduction in key coronary arteries, right? So you're comparing a group that has a diagnosed cardiovascular disease, okay, compared to a group that doesn't. Now, what we want to know is, how does LDL cholesterol predict, after you look at all the different variables, looking at 800 people, how does it predict those people that have had a diagnosis of heart disease? Well, it turns out it wasn't very sensitive. It wasn't very specific. However, ApoB to A1 ratio was, okay? So this is where we need to know, because there's a large subset of individuals who suffer from a fatal heart attack who have low or even normal cholesterol, because it's missing a lot of people. And so this is a much more sensitive and specific biomarker. Now, I before we continue on with that, I want to dive into a little bit more about the science and talk then about Lp(a). Now that you understand that you're going to go to your doctor, if they freak out and say, oh my gosh, Sally, I know you've lost weight. I know you're feeling better. I know your blood pressure's down. I know you cured your IBS, but your LDL cholesterol is increased, so we need to put you on this medication. You're going to say, time out. Okay, let's look at my triglycerides. Let's look at my liver enzymes. Let's look at those in relation to my lipids, and also consider the ApoB to A1 ratio and add in Lp(a), okay? Now, I want to convince you with some science, because the ApoA-1, remember, that's a feature of your HDL cholesterol that's involved in reverse cholesterol transport. It has antioxidant capacity. It affects the endothelium in a favorable way. ApoA-1 can also manifest antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects, and it can stimulate both endothelial production of nitric oxide. Remember, NO, nitric oxide. A lot of people take this, take L-arginine and citrulline in a pre-workout context to increase, sort of have a better pump when they exercise. Just a small, side note, there was a clinical study that looked at L-arginine to affect the outcome in individuals who were hospitalized with COVID-19. And actually the individuals, it cut down their hospitalization time by 25 to 30% or even more. They were only doing 1.5 grams of L-arginine per day. So improving vasodilation by virtue of increasing nitric oxide signaling affects the health of the endothelium. So ApoA-1, again, a feature of HDL, did all that. Also, ApoA-1 manifests several anti-atherogenic effects. An accumulating body of data indicates that the ApoB to A1 ratio is a powerful predictor of the risk for future cardiovascular disease, but a lot of doctors aren't looking at this. It's essentially what they say. So much more sensitive, much more specific than LDL cholesterol. I just got to mention, this paper, friends, was published in 2011. This is not new, but your doctor, or most doctors, are so busy in their practice charting, dealing with insurance reimbursement claims and the business of medicine, that sometimes these papers, and I know because I've sold to those very well-intended, altruistic health professionals, right? They're so busy in their practice, they can't keep up with all this. And so that's why I'm trying to help you help them. And they like it when you bring them studies, okay? So you're not circumventing their sort of scope of care. You're helping them, and they appreciate that. Okay, now let's talk about Lp(a). This to me is quite fascinating, because we know that it's linked with cardiovascular disease and potentially blood clotting. It's not favorable, but it hasn't been totally sussed out as to what exactly it is. And I thought this paper did a great job, and the image that I'm going to share with you just, to me, solidified this. So if it solidified it for me, I hope it really helps you. And this was an aha moment, okay? So apolipoprotein(a) itself is remarkably similar in sequence and form to plasminogen. Okay, this is new to me, so just listen. The enzyme that, when activated, binds to and degrades fibrin to break up clots. However, apolipoprotein(a), also known as Lp(a), lacks the same protease activity as plasminogen. So therefore, Lp(a) can compete with plasminogen for fibrin binding, inhibiting fibrinolysis. Okay, a lot of new words. Essentially, Lp(a) competes with an enzyme that degrades clots. Okay. Think about this. Think about it like the network here. High LDL cholesterol, high diet in oxidizable oils, linoleic acid from corn, cotton, canola, the whole thing. Okay. Fried foods, all of that. Oxidized LDL, Lp(a), inhibition of breaking up clots. Okay. So you go on an airplane, you have chicken nuggets, you're sitting for a long period of time, you develop a clot. Maybe you can't break it up. You can have deep vein thrombosis or a thromboembolic event. Not a good recipe, not a good scenario. So don't eat fried foods. Try to not have the packaged foods that contain the canola oil, the sunflower oil, the soy oil, all of that, okay? Now, those omega-6 linoleic acid-derived fats are not to be confused with long-chain PUFAs from marine-derived fish, EPA and DHA. These are totally different. EPA and DHA exert a lot of anti-inflammatory signaling within the immune system. They're not oxidizable in the same way that linoleic acid is. I know this is a misconception on the internet, and people hear PUFA and they think EPA DHA is the same as linoleic. It's not. They are completely different, not to be confused. Okay, I just want to mention that right here. And I have an image that's going to talk about this, but another bad role for Lp(a) has been hypothesized following on the observation that 90% of oxidized lipoproteins are bound to ApoB containing lipoproteins are actually also bound to Lp(a). And so it seems that a large percentage of these oxidized LDL particles or remnant lipoproteins that we've been talking about that contain the ApoB, that Lp(a) is part of that. So it's this big sort of cluster, and we need to be aware of this. So is it LDL causing the problem? Going back to the original hypothesis of this whole video, is it LDL causing the problem, or is it the oxidized LDL that is the problem? And I will argue, and there's a lot of research now to support the latter, okay? So we need to understand that. Now let's share with you some images from this case study. This was a phenomenal paper. I would encourage you to read this. Even if you're not on a ketogenic diet, but just to understand some of the images that are featured here and understand what a lipoprotein particle analysis or subtraction is, and how going on a low carb, high fat diet does change the levels of lipoproteins in the body, but it doesn't alter the atherogenicity of the particles, okay? So it doesn't cause the particles to behave in a more negative way. So the title here is a standard lipid panel is insufficient for the care of a patient on a high-fat, low-carb ketogenic diet. Again, two scientists from out in Boston, Harvard University, and I think one here was at Oxford. Essentially what they do is they characterize a patient in here who's early 20s, had really a tough case of IBS, irritable bowel disease, was on a lot of different medications, I think Remicade and another biologic or something, and got a lot of symptom relief by going on a ketogenic diet. Because as we've talked about with other scientists over the years on this podcast, with Brianna Stubbs and others, with Dom D'Agostino even, we talk about this NLRP3 inflammasome, where this is the signaling hub that when triggered, it initiates all this downstream sequela that's involved in inflammation. And it turns out that beta-hydroxybutyrate, the main ketone body made by your own liver, after you exercise, after you intermittent fast, or after you eat a low-carb ketogenic diet, that BHB increases, then it kind of turns down the thermostat on this inflammatory network signaling hub called the NLRP3 inflammasome. Well, by virtue of doing all that biology that we just talked about, this individual got remission from his IBS, okay? However, his lipids changed, which would cause most clinicians to say, you know what, that keto diet, I know it reversed your IBS that you've been suffering from for all these years. Let's just go back to eating your standard American diet and get on the Remicade again. Okay, not a good scenario, right? And so these clinicians publish these case studies, which will eventually lead to, small observational studies and hopefully RCTs, randomized, controlled trials, to help to better understand, the changes in a diet and how that reflects in lipids, right? So what you see here is your standard lipid panel. This is what most doctors order, okay? Total cholesterol, an estimate, Friedwald equation. HDL cholesterol, an estimate, right? LDL cholesterol. So all of those increase in this individual. However, they went and did a before and after lipoprotein particle test using a lab through Quest known as Cleveland Heart Labs. So there's Berkeley Heart Labs, there's Cleveland Heart Labs. You've probably heard about the VAP or the NMR. These are all different types of lipoprotein particle tests. Also SpectraCell out in Houston, Texas, right? I'm more of a fan of SpectraCell or Cleveland Heart Labs. Secondarily, I think Berkeley does a good job. The NMR and the VAP, I'm not a big fan of due to the inherent inaccuracies associated with those tests. But if that's all you have, that's fine. Well, I would just say actually an ApoB to A1 ratio with LP(a) is probably better than the NMR and VAP. But that's just my opinion. I used to sell in this space, so whatever, take it for what it is. However, the important thing to understand here is when you look at the lipoprotein particles that were assessed in this individual before and after, although LDL cholesterol increased, what you saw if you did a deeper dive into looking at, because these particles are not homogeneous, right? They're not all the same. You can have big fluffy, large buoyant, as they say, or small dense particles. And the functionality and the protectiveness, structure equals function. So if the structure changes, it's going to impact the biology of the particle. Larger HDL particles are more protective. Small, dense HDL particles are not as protective. And what you see here in this particle subtraction, also known as lipoprotein particle assessment, is all favorable changes in both LDL cholesterol and HDL cholesterol, which is important because, again, most doctors are just keened into what's your LDL, is it increase or decrease? Here we're looking at the size, the shape, and the number of both HDL particles and LDL particles. And as you see here, they all were favorably increased. However, and this is a big however, again, because a lot of people are eating oxidizable oils in their diet. However, there was evidence of increased LDL oxidation. So what are the clinical implications here and recommendations from one physician at Harvard and Oxford? They say increased consumption of vitamin C. I would say yes, vitamin C. You could also consider N-acetylcysteine. You could also consider sulforaphane potentially. Curcumin is another one. And to the best of my knowledge, would steer someone more towards actually coenzyme Q10. Coenzyme Q10 is a fat-soluble antioxidant that may function a little bit better than vitamin C in the context of oxidized LDL, okay? But they secondarily, and I think this is the most important clinical recommendation, is decreased consumption of oxidation-prone polyunsaturated fats. Essentially, don't have fried foods, don't eat, processed foods that are made using canola, cottonseed, soy, corn, safflower, okay? Done. Don't do it. It's simple, friends. Make your food from scratch. Cook with butter, cook with coconut oil, use a little bit of olive oil, avocado, fine, but not those linoleic acid derived oils, okay? Because remember, as we've already said, I'll say it again, your LDL cholesterol is naturally going to increase as you get more physically fit and more metabolically healthy. So that means that there is potentially increased probability of being oxidized. So don't add kerosene to that by having these highly oxidizable oils in your diet. Just get them out. I've heard a lot of different things where people say, once I pull the canola and the sunflower and safflower and corn and all that out of my diet, I don't need to wear sunscreen anymore. Like I can go outside, I don't get burned. I'm hearing a lot of interesting things about this. Now, of course, we don't have large randomized placebo-controlled studies to verify all of these anecdotes, but it is important to understand that is a feature that we're hearing. And anecdotes lead to case studies, lead to trials. So maybe in 10 years, we'll have that data. So friends, I just thought this was interesting. I had to share it with you, especially during the winter months. Now, what I would like from you is feedback on this. Is it complicated? Do you understand it? I want to know in the comments, please, because when you talk about lipoprotein particles and different phenotypic expression of the particles, it gets confusing. But honestly, we just got to learn this stuff so that we can have more educated conversations. It's going to be the year 2022 at some point, and this data has been coming out since the early 2000s, and it's still not being utilized in the clinic, and we need to change that so that we can reduce their risk and improve their metabolic health. So I appreciate you for listening all the way through. What I'm going to let you know about is next week, we're going to talk about ApoE. So this is a gene that has different isoforms that can increase your risk, potentially if you have one allele, the ApoE4 allele, for dementia and for cardiovascular disease. So I want you to pay attention to that. If you enjoyed this video, you're definitely going to like that. So please subscribe. Also, if you found value, please share this with a friend or family member. Hopefully you have a great holiday season. We will catch you on a future episode down the road. Bye now.